Welcome back! Today we're talking about Candide, chapters 7 through 12. When we last left our hero, he was alone and friendless and beaten after losing his dear master Pangloss. But, just at the end of chapter 6, an old woman beckoned to him and told him to come with her. In chapter 7, Candide follows the old woman, who takes him to a nice room where she gives him food and clothing and takes care of him. The old woman says it's not her that offers him this kindness, but someone else. And after a few days, after Candide finally heals, he begs the woman to tell him who this wonderful benefactor is. "Come with me," says she, "and don't speak a word." So she takes him to this wonderful house, and inside there is a veiled figure, dressed beautifully. The old woman instructs him to remove the veil, and as he does so, he discovers, "It's Cunegonde!" "Then it's really you," said Candide. "You're alive! I've found you again in Portugal. Then you were never raped? You never had your belly ripped open, as the philosopher Pangloss assured me?" "Oh yes," said the lovely Cunegonde, "but one doesn't always die of such accidents." So Candide tells his story, and then Cunegonde tells her story in the next chapter. In chapter 8, Cunegonde tells the story of how she lost her home and how she arrived where she is today. It starts back in Tondre ten Tronckh after Candide had been kicked out. They were attacked, as we know, by the Bulgars, and the castle was destroyed, and her family was slaughtered, and she herself was stabbed and raped. But in the midst of her rape, the captain walks in and, seeing her beauty, decides to take her for himself. Afterwards, he has to sell her off to another man, Don Issachar the Jew. And after a while, under death threats, Don Issachar has to share Cunegonde with the Grand Inquisitor. So she's passed back and forth between the two 3 and 4 days of the week. They split her on the Sabbath, which is kind of confusing because the Jews and the Christians have a different concept of when Sabbath begins. And so she was recently in attendance at the auto da fe that the Grand Inquisitor was putting on, and there she saw her dear beloved Candide, but she fainted away before she could help him. And so she gets her servant, the old woman, to go out and help Candide instead, and now finally they are together again. She finishes her story, and they begin to eat dinner when all of a sudden in bursts Don Issachar, bringing us to chapter 9. So Don Issachar is not happy to see that Cunegonde is sharing her affections with yet another man, and so he rushes forward and attacks Candide. Fortunately, Candide was given a sword by the old woman, and so he whips it out and kills Don Issachar. They're all horror-stricken at the fact that sweet little Candide has just committed murder, when in pops the Grand Inquisitor. And so Candide, not knowing what else to do, goes ahead and kills him too. Now they're really in trouble, Candide having just committed a double murder and Cunegonde losing both of her benefactors. Since Pangloss isn't around to give them advice, they turn to the old woman, and the woman very practically says, "Well, we have 3 horses out here, gather up all your gold and jewels and we'll flee." And so off they rush. On to chapter 10. Chapter 10 begins with the revelation that on their way to Cadiz, they have been robbed completely blind by a Franciscan friar. They don't have any money whatsoever, and so they sell one of their horses and they ride together on their way to Cadiz. There they find some political conflict between the Jesuits in the New World and Spain and Portugal. You see, the Jesuits are preaching independence from Spain and Portugal, and therefore a fleet is being amassed to go over and take care of that problem. Since Candide already has military experience, he's quickly hired on. And so Candide, Cunegonde, and the old woman get on a boat and sail to the New World, where they hope to find a life that is really the best of all possible worlds. After all, Europe seems to be a pretty miserable place, but maybe the New World, with all its idyllic hope, will really be the perfect place. Probably not. Cunegonde is being mopey because of all of her misery, and the old woman says, "You really don't have it that bad. I have it worse than you." Cunegonde nearly broke out laughing. She found the old woman comic and pretending to be more unhappy than she. "Ah, you poor old thing," said she, "unless you've been raped by 2 Bulgars, stabbed twice in the belly, seen 2 of your castles destroyed, witnessed the murder of 2 of your mothers and 2 of your fathers, and watched 2 of your lovers being whipped in an auto da fe, I do not see how you can have it worse than me. Besides, I was born a baroness, with 72 quarterings, and I have worked in a scullery." The old woman replies, "My lady, you do not know my birth and rank, and if I showed you my rear end, you would not talk as you do, and you might even speak with less assurance." And so now, the old woman will tell her story in chapters 11 and 12. In chapter 11, we discover that the old woman is actually the daughter of Pope Urbain X and the Princess of Palestrina. She was so amazingly gorgeous when she was younger that anyone who saw her would swoon. She was engaged to this handsome prince, who was then murdered the night before their wedding. And so, in her time of grief, her and her mother decided to sail away. However, they were both captured by pirates, and raped repeatedly. Then they were carried off to Morocco to be sold as slaves. However, when they arrive in Morocco, they find that 50 separate civil wars are going on at once, and they're caught up in the middle of them. The old woman, as a young princess, watches her mother being quartered along with all of her bridesmaids, and everyone murdered until finally she's the last one left alive, half dead on a pile of corpses. She falls into a swoon and wakes up to find a man lying on top of her. But this man is a eunuch, bringing us to chapter 12. This man is a eunuch, and therefore he can't rape her, even though he wishes he could. But then they discover that actually he's an old friend of the family, and it's a wonderful reunion. He hears her sad story and tells her that he's going to take care of her. However, shortly thereafter, he sells her into slavery. As soon as she's sold as slave in Algiers, a plague breaks out and kills all the people around her, and she herself just barely recovers from it. And then she's sold as a slave from one place to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, when finally she winds up in a siege of the Janissaries. The siege is stuck in a stalemate, and the people inside the castle are slowly starving. Finally, after eating all of the eunuchs, they decide to go ahead and eat the women too. But instead of eating the women right away, they decide to just eat one rump steak, and then they can save the other for a later date. After eating one half of each woman's rear, they are attacked and all killed. The women are patched up, and they're herded off to Moscow, where she works as a slave and is beaten daily, 20 lashes a day, until finally her master is killed, and she runs away and becomes a chambermaid, from place to place to place to place to place. She concludes by talking about no matter how miserable life is, we still all try to cling to it as hard as we can. And she finally ended up in the service of Don Issachar, and now she decides she's going to throw her lot in with Cunegonde. But she concludes by saying, I would not have even mentioned my own misfortunes if you had not irked me a bit, and if it weren't the custom on shipboard to pass the time with stories. In a word, my lady, I have had some experience of the world, I know it. Why not try this diversion? Ask every passenger on this ship to tell you his story, and if you find a single one who has not often cursed the day of his birth, and who has not often told himself that he's the most miserable of men, then you may throw me overboard headfirst. The end of chapter 12. Characters! So in this section we continue with, of course, our main hero, Candide. However, we notice a little bit of change in Candide. At the beginning, he's depicted as perfect and pure and sweet and innocent. But in this section, he actually murders 2 people, and that's going to become kind of a trend. In spite of his sweethearted innocence, he's really not that great of a guy. Voltaire, of course, enjoys the irony of this. Also, Candide's one true hope and purpose in life is restored in the finding of Cunegonde. While Cunegonde was dead, he didn't really seem to have any direction to go, but now that he has her, he has something that he wants out of life. He has a reason to keep going. Bring us to our second character, which is Cunegonde. I didn't bring her up in the last video because her presence was fairly brief. However, she is an extremely important character in this story. To some extent, she is a parody of the ideal woman for Candide. Now, in Voltaire's day, the ideal woman would have been beautiful, would have been pure, would have been faithful, would have been patient in trial. Cunegonde, as we notice, has already begun to fail at several of these attributes. She's definitely no longer pure, even though she claims to be. She says, though a person of honor may be raped once, her virtue is only strengthened by the experience. In Voltaire's day, the fact that Cunegonde was passed from man to man would certainly mark her as impure. Also, she's not particularly resilient. She whines a lot. At the end of chapter 10, leading up to the old woman's story, Cunegonde is really just wailing about how miserable she is. It's something she's going to continue to do. But at least she's still faithful to Candide, and at least she's still beautiful. We should also notice that Cunegonde has been brought back to life after being horribly murdered. I mean, you don't actually come back from being raped and disemboweled. But we'll find that Candide's friends are particularly hard to kill. They keep dying and coming back, like a soap opera or a cartoon. It makes us considerably less concerned about them when they meet gruesome deaths. Our third character of importance in this section is the old woman. She takes the place of Pangloss as our mentor and philosopher. Instead of being excessively optimistic and short-sighted, she tends to be a bit more practical. She knows what it's like to suffer, but she doesn't spend a lot of time bemoaning her fate. She only tells the story because she's kind of irritated at Cunegonde and also to pass the time on the boat. Notice her conclusion. In a word, my lady, I have had some experience of the world, I know it. Why not try this diversion? Ask every passenger on the ship to tell you his story. And if you find a single one who has not often cursed the day of his birth, who has not often told himself that he is the most miserable of men, then you may throw me overboard head first. She notices not only do we all suffer, but everyone also has a bad attitude about suffering. And so in this part of the book, we move from just the general bad things happening to people to more of the problem of our response to evil and to suffering. It's not just the tragedy itself that makes us miserable, but it's also our attitude. If everyone in the world sits around moping and whining about their misery, we're going to be pretty unhappy. And so through the rest of the book, we're going to continue to explore not only the things that hurt us, the things that make us miserable, but also the way we respond to it, and the way our own responses can be negative. Thanks for watching. Check back in next time to find out what happened when we finally arrive in the new world. Will we truly find the best of all possible worlds? Click up here to watch the previous episode, chapters 1 through 6, or click down here to watch the next episode, chapters 13 through 18, or click down here to subscribe. I'll see you next time.